I'm Dr. Brianne Kent, and I'm Associate Director of the Institute, and really I'm excited to host this workshop for undergraduate students. So I'm Assistant Professor in the Department of Psychology, and I'm joined today in person with Dr. Peter Ruben, who is Professor in the Department of Biomedical Physiology and Kinesiology. So thank you, Dr. Ruben, for joining today. We're also joined in person by Jaspreet Daud, who's the Community Engagement Co-op student working with the Institute now for about 6 months. She's a fourth-year behavioral neuroscience major, and she's supporting the Institute with community engagement activities, like workshops like this one, as well as our seminar series. And she is the perfect point of contact for any undergraduate students who have questions or comments. So her email is right there. I encourage you to reach out to her if you want to know more about the Institute and what we're offering for undergraduate students. We're also joined online by Dr. Kelly Shen, who is the Senior Program Manager for the Institute, and she's really making everything run. She supports all of the INN activities and programs, and she's an alternate point of contact for your questions and comments. So if you ever want to reach out to the Institute, you can email us at inn@sfu.ca, and Kelly will be responding. So an overview of today's workshop. So we'll start with how to gain neuroscience research experience as an undergraduate student. And then I will pass it over to Dr. Ruben, and he will give you advice on research careers in neuroscience. And then we'll end with a Q&A. So how to gain undergraduate research experience in neuroscience at SFU. And I'll say that this advice is for students who are taking behavioral neuroscience or psychology or cognitive neuroscience or cognitive sciences, but also students who are not neuroscience majors, but who might be interested in gaining neuroscience research experience. For example, if you're in an engineering program and not working specifically with neuroscientists, but are interested in applying your skill set to neuroscience research, all of these opportunities would apply. So the first way to get research lab experience, and probably the easiest, is to volunteer. So think about the type of research you want to participate in, find out who's running it on campus, so reach out to a specific professor. It really helps if you've taken a course with a professor. So let's say you take a course on neuroscience, you're really enjoying the work, the professor mentions what's happening in their lab, you do well in the course, and you email them or talk to them during the office hours and let them know that you're really interested in the material and that you'd love an opportunity to volunteer and support their research that's happening on campus. Whenever you reach out to a professor, it's always best to explain why you're interested in getting involved in research. You always have to be very professional. Professors do get a lot of requests, and being polite and professional really does go a long way. It's also best to include a resume or your unofficial transcript as an attachment if you're emailing a professor, or if you're emailing them after talking to them in class or during office hours. It's good to, when you do a follow-up email, to add this additional information so that they know what courses you've taken that might be relevant, what other experiences you've had that might be relevant. Just because professors do get a lot of requests for volunteers. So it's a good way to show that you're serious and that you're up for the task of participating in research. The other option is occasionally professors are able to pay research assistants. And so sometimes there might be an advertisement that you see where they're looking to pay a research assistant to help on a specific project. And typically these have certain time durations. For example, like a summer project or a 1-year commitments required. They're not common at SFU, but you do see postings occasionally. And sometimes when you're asking to volunteer, sometimes a volunteer position can end up turning into a paid research position after that you've learned some skills and shown that you're a reliable and that you're able to contribute at a higher level. Another great way to gain undergraduate research experience is to join the co-op program. So I know the BBK co-op staff is amazing at placing students, and a lot of times those co-op students end up in research labs, either at the university or in private labs, if that's what you're interested in. I've had a co-op student in my lab, and it was wonderful. I think it was a great experience for me to have a co-op student, and it was also a great experience for them. And their co-op placement ended up turning into a longer-term research assistant position in my lab. So if you're interested in gaining a wide variety of research experiences, and maybe you don't have one particular professor in mind and want some support in preparing your resumes and interview preparation, I highly recommend the co-op program. It's wonderful at SFU, and they have a lot of different connections within the university and also outside the university. So another wonderful way for undergraduate students to get research experience that is less known, not many students take advantage of this, is the MyTax Global Link for international internships. Now, for Canadian students or students at SFU, this program is specifically for you to get external internships outside of Canada. So you can't use this funding at SFU or within Canada, but they give you $6,000 for a 12-week internship. And you can really go to any lab that's willing to welcome you. So it helps if you've maybe made a connection through a professor at SFU, if you're working in a lab and they have a collaboration going on internationally, that's a great way. Or if you're just really interested in a particular topic and have a skill set that you think might be useful, you can always reach out to an international lab. It is a competitive process, but in my experience, success rates have been pretty high. When I was working in the United States, I was a researcher in Boston. I had a Canadian student, undergraduate student from Western University, come and work with me for the summer through this program, and it was really great. A few weeks ago, SFU sent out an email specifically about the MyTax Global Link, but it was for this particular program called RISE Global Link Research Internship that was specific to Germany. And they had more support in terms of finding labs within Germany for SFU students to go and do these summer internships. So like I said, they're $6,000 for up to 12 weeks, which is a really nice way to get paid research experience in an international lab. And I highly recommend looking into that program. At SFU, another way to get paid research experience, and this is specifically for a full-time research experience for a semester, are the Undergraduate Student Research Awards, and these are USRAs. These actually qualify as co-op placements if you are in the co-op program and need to do your 3 co-op placements. The USRA would qualify. And to do this, you would need to find a professor at SFU who's willing to take you on and support your application. The application deadlines are quite short, but you do have to have a small research proposal that the professor can help prepare, and the deadlines are in February. These are quite competitive, and predominantly they're based around GPA. So students with strong GPAs usually do better, have better success rates. But if you're interested in doing a full-time research position in a lab, especially if you've already been volunteering in the lab or have a research assistant position in a lab, a professor might be more likely to support your application, because sometimes professors are limited in the number of applications that they can support each year. Now, if you want course credit for your research experience, so instead of just volunteering or instead of getting paid, there are 2 different approaches, at least in the psychology department, but each department manages these research courses differently. So in the psychology department, we have a course called Research Engagement, where you can specify that you want to dedicate 1 credit worth of hours each week, which is about 3 hours a week, up to 3 credits, which is about 9 hours a week in the lab. And this is a pass-fail course, so you don't get a letter grade, but you get course credit for just participating in research in a psychology lab. Now, this was specifically designed for students who might be really close to graduation and only need 1 or 2 more credits. Maybe they don't want to take a full course to complete their degree requirements and are looking for research experience. So it's a nice way to get course credit for your research experience. The other course is called a directed study course. And this is where you work one-on-one with a professor on a topic really of your choice that's also of interest to the professor. And this has to be an agreed upon application for this course. And typically these evolve from another established course. So if you took a course, let's say on aging in psychology with Wendy Thornton, and you really liked the topic and you just thought, we covered a small amount on this topic and I want to spend a whole semester just diving in to this topic in more detail, you could talk to Wendy Thornton and you could ask her about specific topics. And so that's just that you want to explore in more detail that follows from the course. In my class, I teach learning and memory, Psychology 325. Same idea. If I covered, one topic in a small amount of detail and you just thought it was really interesting and came to me after and said, I'd really loved a course dedicated on reading more about this research and learning more about this topic, you could do a directed study with me and we could dive into that topic in more detail. So professors are usually limited in how many directed study students they can take each semester, and these vary depending on their teaching loads and how many graduate students they have in their labs. So you can't take these for granted. And the same when reaching out to volunteer in a research lab, being professional, explaining your motivation, adding your resume and your unofficial transcript can really help in getting a positive response from a professor who might want to work with you on the research engagement or a directed study course. And finally, to gain research experience as an undergraduate student at FFU in neuroscience, you could do the honors program. And each department runs the honors program slightly different. In psychology, it's a 2-semester program. The first semester, you have a course where you're meeting with other honors students to talk about preparing for graduate school and preparing your honors proposal. And then the second semester is where you're actually collecting the data and analyzing and writing and defending. And I always view this as like a little mini master's. In BBK, the honors program isn't quite as structured as in psychology. You spend your first semester working with your supervisor, preparing your proposal, and then the second semester doing the data collection, but there isn't a specific honors course like psychology. So I encourage you to look into your department's honors program and find out the specifics there. It's always good to talk to the professor early. Don't wait until the last minute to apply for these programs. Again, sometimes professors can only take on 1 honor student a year or no honor student. So it's always good to think about this early, start the conversation, approach them professionally, and think thoughtfully about why you want to do an honors and what the honors project might be. There are often course requirements to do the honors program and also GPA requirements. So I encourage you to look into your department's requirements if you're interested in those programs. But for anyone thinking about a research career or graduate school, it's really a fantastic program to do, like a mini master's while you're an undergraduate student. Okay, so now I will turn it over to Peter Ruben, who will talk to you about career paths.
First of all, welcome everybody. It's really nice to see so many people here, and I see we've got about 35 people, 36 people online, so that's great. Shows a real interest in research and a real interest in the neuroscience program, and I'm delighted by that. Just quickly in the room, a show of hands, how many of you are in the behavioral neuroscience program? And how many of you are in psychology? And how many of you are in BPK? And how many of you are something else altogether? Okay. Well, wherever you're from and whatever you're studying, welcome. It's, again, great to see you. So I am going to talk a little bit about career paths and kind of the process of getting from being an undergraduate student to having a career in something at least associated with neuroscience, if not necessarily in neuroscience. But before I do that, I think we have Melanie Cameron in the room. Melanie is from BPK Co-op, and I wanted to give her a shout out and point her out to you. And I think, Melanie, you're prepared to answer questions after. Yeah. Okay, great. All right. So a career, what to do. You're still young. You don't have to decide yet, but it's a good idea to start thinking about it. So hopefully everybody's read Alice in Wonderland. Alice says to the Cheshire Cat, will you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? And the Cheshire Cat, who's sitting up in the tree, having materialized from behind its grin, says, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to. And then Alice says, I don't much care where. And the Cheshire Cat then says, then it doesn't much matter which way you go. And Alice then says, so long as I get somewhere. And then the Cheshire Cat says, oh, you're sure to do that if only you walk long enough. So the path to a degree or a career in neuroscience it's a long walk, but it helps going on that walk if excuse me, you know what you want to do, at least approximately, once you start walking that path. So do you want to do research? Do you want to teach? Do you want to be a health professional like a physician? Do you want to be in science communications where you translate knowledge and tell the public what's going on and write for the New York Times or the Globe or one of the scientific journals that we read in the field, like Science or Nature? Or do you want a health or science policy job, working for the government, working on contract, doing different things, but looking at health and science from a policy perspective? So all of those are possible with a degree that you're going to get. But some typical science degrees and careers that they lead to include, of course, a bachelor's of science or arguably a bachelor's of arts, which could land you a job as a lab tech. Or if you had lots of training and communications, you could get perhaps a science communications job. But that requires maybe a concurrent degree in communications, a lot of writing practice, a lot of presentation practice. If you get a master's, you could be a lab manager, which is kind of a step up from being a lab tech. And that could be in either academia, like here at SFU or another institution, or it could be in industry. So you could possibly be a project manager with the government or a research coordinator with the government. There's lots of those jobs out there. And generally speaking, but not universally, a master's degree is necessary at a minimum for those kinds of jobs. And then finally, if you're get a PhD like myself or Brianne, then you could become an academic teacher and a researcher like we are. Or you could be an industry researcher. And many of the people, for instance, that I collaborate with are in industry and they have their PhD, but they've decided to go that direction, perhaps because they weren't so keen on teaching. Finally, you could work for the government and be a government researcher. So my path, which is increasingly unusual and arguably harder than it used to be, it started off a long time ago. I got my bachelor's in biology at George Washington University, and then I went on and got a master's in biology, specializing in neurobiology, also from George Washington. And then I did my PhD in medical physiology with a specialty in neurosciences at University of Calgary. Then I went on and did a postdoc for 4 years at Stanford University. And then I did a short postdoc in Hawaii, which turned into an assistant professorship in Hawaii. And that was there for as long as I wanted to stay. And then I moved to Utah, where I became an associate professor and finally a professor. Took a sabbatical leave where I was in Switzerland for 2 years. and then moved to SFU in 2006 and became the chair of BPK. It was back then the School of Kinesiology, but never mind. And did that for 5 years. Then I was an associate dean for 7 years. And now I'm back to being a regular old professor. And for who knows how long, maybe 5 minutes, maybe another couple of years, who knows. Anyway, so that is a kind of a classic progression for somebody who wants to do academic research and teaching. And I really enjoy teaching, and I really enjoy being surrounded by people much younger than me. And I really enjoy having the opportunity to kind of do what I want to do in the lab and study what I want to study in the lab, or what I can get funding for. So if you want to be a researcher, here's a partial list of what researchers do. First of all, they do a lot of lab work. You spend a lot of time in the lab, whatever kind of lab you're in, neuroscience or otherwise. You do a lot of lab work. You do a lot of troubleshooting and problem solving. There are always problems to solve, always, always. You analyze data. You look at the data that you've gathered when you're doing the lab work, and then you analyze it. That's a lot of computer time. You write grant applications constantly. It's really important to be a good writer. It's really important to be able to tell the story that you want to tell to people who may not be as well versed in what it is that you do, because they will make decisions about whether or not you will get the money to do the research you want. So writing good grant applications it's hard, it's really competitive, and it's an art. All the practice that you can get writing, I can't emphasize this enough, all the practice that you can get writing, do so. You write papers, publications, papers for publication. Kind of the currency of what we do as researchers is writing papers. We translate our data that we gather in the lab, and we turn them into publications, and we get them published. This is also fairly competitive. The good journals only take a very few number of papers each issue. So you got to be able to write and write well. You give presentations. We go to national meetings. We go to international meetings. We have meetings here at SFU. And it's important to be able to present your research in ways that people can understand. Again, even if they're not necessarily from exactly the same field that you're in. So knowledge translation permeates through all of these things. And then finally, teaching and training others is something that we do a lot of when we're particularly in an academic environment. A big part of our job is teaching. And so being able to teach, being comfortable about teaching, and training others in the lab, and trying to get people to love what it is that you do as much as you love it. So timelines to degree completion are typically 4 to 6 years as an undergrad, which, as you are painfully aware, is mostly coursework. But as if you follow the path that Brianne sketched out for you, you can also get involved in research. Then a master's degree is usually 2 to 3 years. And it's about 50% coursework and 50% research, depending on the program. That varies from one program to another. And then finally, a PhD is 4 to 5 years, a little bit depending on whether you've done a master's. It's possible to start a master's degree, for instance, and then transition into a PhD program once you meet a certain minimum number of qualifications. So a PhD usually takes 4 to 5 years and is usually, not exclusively, but usually 100% research. You're just doing your project, you're writing about it, you may be applying for grants for yourself. It's all research focused. There's generally speaking very little coursework involved in a PhD. And then once you've completed a PhD and you've got your doctorate degree, you do what are called postdoctoral fellowships. And that means going off, usually someplace different, learning some new techniques that may or may not be directly related to what you did as a PhD student, may expand on what you did as a PhD student. It's an opportunity to just completely throw yourself into research. There are lots of grants that are available for postdoctoral research. I see a question. Can I, explain what an honors is too? Yeah, what it entails. Well, we can go back to Brianne for that one. So a postdoc is generally 2 to 4 years. I happen to do 2 because the offer to come to Hawaii just sounded too good to pass up and do another 2 years. And that got me in the door to a faculty position at Hawaii. So it was totally worth it. I was asked to talk about finding a lab and a supervisor. And that is a lot like what Brianne said about finding somebody to do undergraduate research with. First of all and foremost, do your homework. Learn all you can about the person you think you want to work with. As Brianne said, it's great to take a course from that person. It's great to establish a relationship with that person. Also talk to people who work in that individual's labs and find out if they're a nice person or a tyrant, because we're not all perfect. If you're going to decide to work with somebody, read their recent publications. Try to get a sense of what it is that they're doing now and what excites you about that. And if you can go in even with a half-baked idea that revolves around what that person's research is about at the time, that is really helpful. That means that you care enough to have done the background work to check into what they're doing, develop an interest in what they're doing, and maybe even think of a possible project to do. Make sure that you understand what the expectations are that that person has for you working in the lab. Even don't be afraid of asking for a written agreement. I always, when I take on a student, get everything down on paper. We both sign it just so that there's no misunderstandings further on. So understand what the expectations are. And then I think this is the final point. It's not always possible, but if you can, try different labs. You may think that you want to do something and go into the lab and you find it just incredibly frustrating. And so you may want to move on to somebody else's lab, and that's perfectly okay. Funding for graduate programs comes from a number of different sources. First of all, there are teaching assistantships. These are provided by the department, and generally speaking, what you do is you assist an instructor like myself with how we deliver the course. So if, for instance, a course has tutorials, often it's a graduate student who's the teaching assistant. I'm sure that many of you, if not all of you, have had that experience. So teaching assistantships is one way. And the great thing about teaching assistantships is it gives you experience in teaching and in relating to students. And it's great practice, so that if you go on to graduate school or ultimately onto an academic or a teaching career, you've at least got some background in teaching. Research assistantships are often available, and those are paid for usually by the supervisor, whoever it is who's supervising your graduate program. And that is money that comes from our research grants. So when we apply for a grant, we develop a budget, and that budget often includes graduate student stipends, research assistantships. And then finally, scholarships from the government, from NSERC, from CIHR, from MITAX, which Brianne mentioned before, and from private sources are often available. And these tend to be very competitive, especially the CIHR and the NSERC grants, but they're worth going for because they can be pretty good money. The challenges and the rewards of research is a topic for an entire workshop by itself. So first of all, have no illusions. Research is really hard. It's really enjoyable, but it's really hard. It takes huge commitment. It can be really frustrating. You probably won't get rich doing it, although some people have developed it into lucrative business careers. It requires a lot of time and a really serious commitment to do what you want to do. You got to love it. You got to be bitten by the research bug, as I said. Research is also really rewarding, and the rewards make up for the difficulty of it. So often the hours are very flexible. You work when you're motivated to work, and if you need time to just sort of stew on whatever it is you need to stew on, you can take that time and do it. It's not always the case, and it depends on who you're working with and what kind of project you're doing. Sometimes there are schedules that are required, but flexibility is a big reward, a big bonus for having a research career. Research is driven by your own interest and your own passion in that interest. And so if you're really keen about something, research is a great way to go, because you get to explore all the aspects of whatever it is that is fueling your passion. You get to spend time with cool people, really. We're interesting, sometimes pretty weird, sometimes pretty smart, often smart. And also, and maybe this is the biggest thing, it's an opportunity to be creative. You know, there's this funny kind of artificial delineation between science and art. And I think that's totally false. I think artists and scientists, good ones, are equally creative, just in different ways. Creativity is a huge part of research, being able to think outside the box, being able to imagine the unimaginable, being able to take your research into really interesting directions. All of that is super important. So the skills required for research, did I mention writing? Writing is so important. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be a good writer. So really hone those skills. Also oral presentations, really important. Being organized. We keep lab books where we write everything that we do down in a lab book. So if we have to repeat an experiment, which we usually need to do, you know what you did last time. And if you need to change a variable, you can see what you did last time, pick a variable and change it. Thinking outside the box, I mentioned that. That's part of the creativity. Teamwork is really important in a lab. We're all working in teams. People don't work on research projects very much anymore as individuals. We all have a team. I have a team right now of only 4 people in the lab, which is it's a relatively small team, 2 postdocs and 2 undergraduate students. It's a nice size. Computer skills, programming, super important. I wish I could program better than I can. And finally, critical thinking. When we read the literature, when you read the newspaper, when you read anything, when you watch TV, being able to think critically about the information that's being fed to you is super important. And that's really important in research too. Being able to think critically about what other people have done that is related to your work, and being able to step back and think critically about your own work. I used to have a mentor who always used to say, be careful not to breathe too much of your own ether. And critical thinking is part of that. Yogi Berra, a baseball manager and catcher, famously said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. Which means, to me, when you see an opportunity, follow that opportunity. Follow your hearts, follow your brain, and take opportunities as they come up. I had amazing opportunities as I was coming up through the process. One of the ways that I met one of my postdoc supervisors was he came to lecture at a summer course that I was taking in California, and I liked him so much that I got a 6-pack of beer and a rowboat and said, we got to go out and swim and talk, and that turned into my first postdoc at Stanford. So when you see an opportunity, take it. When you see a fork in the road, take it. So we're here to answer questions. I am happy to ask you anything. I'm sure Brianne is ready as well, right? And Gastry is here. Melanie is in the back of the room. She can represent BPK Co-op. So yeah, let us know what you're thinking.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ruben. So there's been a couple of questions on the chat. The first was, does the psychology co-op also work as a way to gain research experience? And yes, absolutely, any of the co-op programs can help get you research opportunities. So if you're interested in co-op and interested in research, talk to whoever's managing co-op for your department. Let them know what you're interested in, and they can certainly help find you opportunities that are perfect for you. So can I explain what an honors is? So an honors degree is a little bit of an addition to your typical undergraduate degree. So you have to have a certain GPA to get in and certain course requirements. And it's really designed to prepare somebody for graduate school. So if you're not interested in doing a master's or a PhD, I'm not sure how ideal an honors program is for you, but if you are interested in graduate school, it's a great way to kind of test the waters and make sure that you're on the right path. So what you do in an honors program is you have to find a specific supervisor, a professor who's willing to take you on as a student, and you do a research project that you can help with the design, you do the data collection, the analysis, and then you write it up as a thesis and do an oral defense. So it really is a 2-semester mini master's project. Usually your supervisors, it depends on the supervisor, but usually they're a lot more, they have a specific project in mind that would be suitable for an undergraduate student, or a few that you might be able to choose from. So you can talk about your interests and your goals, and they can come up with a project with you that can be done in the 2 semesters. Would you mind going back to the funding slide for a moment? Sure. And this is recorded and will be posted on the INN YouTube. I believe this is the funding for graduate program slide. Yeah. Okay. Any advice for some? Actually, I'll pause. And Peter, are there any questions in the room?
Dr. Ruben,
yes.
I'm curious, what is some research you are currently conducting?
One question is, what is the research that I'm currently doing? Is that?
Yes.
So I do a lot of different things. My research focuses on a particular protein that you may have heard of called the sodium channel. And with regard to neuroscience, we are studying the effects of certain drugs on the sodium channel, and also looking at some diseases, some seizure disorders, one in particular that's called Dravet syndrome, which is caused by genetic variants in some of the sodium channels that are in the brain.
Okay, shall I go to a question online?
But we've got one more. Two
Okay,
more.
great.
When do you suggest we apply for co-op?
So the question is, when do we suggest that the students apply for co-op? And perhaps, Melanie, do you want to field that one?
Maybe. I'm quite new, so I don't know all the answers. I think a lot of the students that we have are applying even second year, sometimes first. So I think there is no exact right time. It's open, and what you can do is get in touch with us at the BPK office. Just send an email, and we've got a bunch of information on about applying, what you can do to strengthen your competitiveness if you're doing things like applying to see even a research position or a BPK co-op position. And also, can I make one other comment?
Sure.
I just want to say that I'm quite new here to the co-op, this co-op position. And so I have been meeting with students and hearing about their co-op placements. And there's been several students in research positions, some here at UBC and lab positions, and some here in the community at Fraser Health, working with Dr. Heather Stewart and all these things, and they love it. I haven't had one that hasn't been really enjoying the experience and gaining a lot of knowledge that they didn't have before.
That's great. I'll just add that in speaking with Darlene, who does the BBK co-op, she would say apply as early as possible. Don't wait until your third or fourth year. If it's something that you're interested in, you can start early in your undergraduate program, start in the co-op program and preparing. So if you're interested in it, try to find more information and don't hesitate to start the process and apply.
One more question in the room.
I was just curious regarding your research. What do you use to model the disease? Like what methods do you use?
So we use, the question was, what methods do we use? We use a combination of molecular biology and electrophysiology. So we mess around with genes to change their the protein structure, and then we actually record the electrical activity in cells that is caused by these proteins and how they work.
Okay, shall we go to questions online?
Let's.
Great. So the next question is, any advice for someone hoping to get a paid research assistant position? Is the best way just to reach out to professors, or are there sometimes job postings that can be found online? So yes, both are true. It's always good to reach out to a professor. Sometimes they're looking for volunteers and sometimes they have paid positions. When I was an undergraduate student at SFU, I reached out to the professor who was running the research methodology course that I was really enjoying in psychology. I did well in the course and I reached out to her to express my interest in gaining research experience and asked her if she knew of any opportunities. And she said, actually, I have a paid research position that I'm recruiting for right now. And I was able to get a paid research position as my first RA-ship, which was pretty lucky. And it was just because I happened to ask the right person. But, you know, she could have also said, oh, I don't have something, but I do know another professor in the department who's recruiting right now. I do think it's pretty rare to get a paid RA-ship as your very first research experience. Usually it can start as a volunteer role and then potentially move into a paid position. I've had students in my lab who start off doing a semester of volunteer work. They gain some skills. I learned that they're very reliable. And once they're able to contribute more, I'm able to spend grant funding on paying for them to work as an RA in the lab. But typically you want to do at least first semester as a volunteer position just to make sure that it's the right fit, just because grant funds are so limited and so often they're needed for paying for the experiments or for graduate students. So it's quite competitive for undergraduates to get the paid positions. And there are sometimes job postings if there's a project that needs specific support. So there's not really one place to look for the job postings, but sometimes you might see a poster around campus. But the best way is talk to professors who are doing research that you might want to get involved with, because they potentially will know colleagues who are recruiting or they'll be recruiting. So the next question is, can someone who is doing computer science use their skills for neuroscience, or is computer science too different? Absolutely, computer scientists can use their skills for neuroscience. A lot of the work that we do is really interdisciplinary. And so often we might have a biologist or a psychologist who doesn't have the computer coding skills or is trying to create a new type of, in my field, cognitive testing or new type of experimental tool that really having the computer science skills can be hugely beneficial and is exactly the type of RA that we're looking for. So absolutely, computer science is very relevant to research positions in neuroscience.
Yeah, can I just add to that, Brianne?
Sure.
So I happened to be looking at a website today and was looking at what different people did at the Salk Institute, which is in San Diego. And there were a whole bunch of them who were listed as what they do, computational neurobiology. Everything that I do in my lab, even though I am working at the molecular level, we incorporate our results into a computer model to predict what effects that might have on a much bigger system, be it the brain or the heart. And so, yes, again, computing skills are huge in our field. Yes, a question from here.
I'm sorry.
Go
Is
ahead.
there any kind of like computer science certificates or kind of courses that you recommend to take if, for example, I'm willing to like pursue AI or like neuroscience path that can help with like lab research or just kind of help with the neuroscience path in general?
So I don't know if you could hear that online, but the question is, are there any particular courses that we could recommend for someone to take in computing sciences that would help with a neuroscience degree? Is that essentially it?
I am a neuroscience major.
Oh,
so,
okay.
like,
Yeah.
Computer science, since I cannot take computer science courses like as like certificates after graduation.
Right.
anything that's-
So certificates after graduation. I don't know the answer to that question. Do you, Dr. Ken?
No, I do know that there are quite a few online courses I've seen students take, like on Coursera or through different universities online, where there's very specific coding courses, for example, and different computer languages. So I think there's not really a specific one, but depending on what you're trying to learn and what your goals are, I think there are a wide variety of courses that you could take in addition to your undergraduate degree. There's another question online that is the path to getting an RA position different after graduating, i.e. finished bachelor's but not yet in a master's? I assume a lot of volunteer positions that later turn into paid work are reserved for current undergraduate students. So it's easier to get your first RA position when you are an undergraduate student, just because you are still surrounded by professors and able to form relationships with them through your classes and get to know the research. So it is easier for undergraduate students who are currently students. That said, there are no strict rules or there's no reserved spots for current students versus students who have graduated. So there are a lot of students who end up graduating, aren't quite sure that they want to go to graduate school or feel like they need to gain more experience before applying for graduate school. And there are absolutely no rules around this. Now, as a current undergraduate student, you have access to things like co-op, directed studies, research engagement courses, USRAs, the honors program. So there are other mechanisms to getting research experience that aren't available if you're not currently enrolled. If you want to have a volunteer position, it doesn't make too much of a difference whether or not you're a current student or graduated, and even some of the paid RA-ships, particularly if you got research experience as an undergraduate student and have now graduated but have research skills. Often those students are hired in positions like lab tech or lab manager or RAs for studies when they're not currently enrolled as a student. So I have another question online that asks, if I had a position at a diagnostic lab and learned that research that lab isn't for me, but I love applications and active learning, are there opportunities? What opportunities can I look to? So if you've tried research, but you don't want to do research, what opportunities? So I think Dr. Ruben had a list of different opportunities for people who have science degrees, like science communication or science policy, or working in the government, working for a biotech company in a role that isn't necessarily doing the active research. So I think there are a lot of different roles related to research that you could do that aren't actually conducting the research yourself. Another question online is, what are my chances of pursuing research at SFU? Is it very competitive, even with students from other universities? So I think a lot of undergraduate students are successful at gaining research experience. I have a lot of undergraduate students in my lab, either as a co-op, volunteer, paid, directed study, research engagement, honor. So I have, I've had a lot of undergraduate students come through my lab. I know in psychology, there are a lot of undergraduate research assistants in the labs. They are competitive. You do have to be polite and professional and often have to do an interview in order to get a position. I always interview the students before they start my lab. But there are opportunities. And if you don't get one position, you can always apply for another. I don't encourage you to do these kind of blanket emails that are the same for all of the professors, because we see that and we feel like they're a little bit, they're just lacking the information that we're looking for, and we're not convinced by your email that you really understand what you would be doing in our lab, or that you're applying for the right reason. So you can apply and reach out to more than one professor, but like Dr. Ruben said, do your homework, look at what their lab is studying, read their papers, contact them, but have some information to support what you're applying for.
There's another question from the room.
I have a question for Dr. Ken. I'm more interested in, I mean behavioral neuroscience, but I'm more interested in the psychology side aspect. I wonder what kind of research do you do? Because you're in the psychology department, right?
Yep, I'm in the psychology department. So my lab, I run the translational neuroscience lab that's focused on studying Alzheimer's disease and some of the basic mechanisms around sleep and circadian rhythms and learning and memory, but in the context of Alzheimer's disease. And our lab, we use rodent models, so we use transgenic mouse models, and we also do studies with human subjects. Our methods are really designed to be similar between the rodents and the humans. For example, we use touchscreen cognitive testing in both. So in mice, we teach them to nose poke a screen and do a cognitive test and reward them with strawberry milkshake. And in humans, we give them an iPad to do the cognitive testing. And the idea there is we're trying to tap into as similar cognitive mechanisms as we're able to, because in Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases, the ultimate goal is to either improve cognition or to slow cognitive decline. And so we really want our research to focus on the outcomes or the symptoms that we're most interested in. And it's really hard to, in humans, we ask questions and they can answer us, and we can't in rodents where we're able to look at mechanisms. So our lab does a variety of studies, but that's kind of the central theme to all of the work that we do.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the room? How about online, Brianne?
So I have almost graduated and have volunteer experience in a lab, and I'm currently doing a directed studies in BBK, so that's great. If I wanted to pursue post-grad work as a lab tech, would that mainly be through job postings? Yes, mainly through job postings, but also through word of mouth. So talk to professors, let them know you're looking for work. Ask professors if they know of anyone who might be hiring a lab tech. Just let people know the types of roles you're interested in, and use your networks to try to find a lab tech position. But they're often, sometimes they are posted on like the SFU job postings. Any other questions?
Can I ask
Sure. There's a question from Clay Brasilia.
so it's not a question as much as maybe you can comment on it. Everyone here's, there's been a lot of talk about lab work, and curious about your feelings on people with neuroscience or the science background and working in non-traditional roles like marketing or sales in the biotech industry, the tech industry, PC? Is there a demand for that, or?
I could try and answer that. I don't know firsthand for sure. I would imagine that there is a big demand for it. So these are this is sort of similar to another question. Somebody who's tried lab work didn't resonate with them so much, but they're still interested in neuroscience. So what else could they do? Well, they could work in communications, they could work in policy, they could work in marketing with, for instance, a drug company or other kinds of biotech companies. There's lots of companies that make the equipment that we use in our labs. That understanding that equipment and how it can be used for research is super important, and it can be done by somebody who doesn't necessarily use the equipment to do research, but who understands it well enough to represent that company and try and help them sell their equipment. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities in all sorts of fields: business, marketing, economics, government, policy, that are related to science and related as much as any other science to neuroscience, but that aren't necessarily doing research exactly.
I'll just let the room know as well that Dr. Kelly Shen just posted in the chat on Zoom that the Institute for Neuroscience and Neurotechnology has a job posting link. So when there are neuroscience related job postings at SFU, we will be posting them there under current opportunities. So I encourage you to go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, and get in touch if you're looking for neuroscience positions to see whether or not we're hosting opportunities like this. The psychology department a couple weeks ago had a research lab fair where you could go around and learn about the different research labs and sign up if you were interested in being an RA or being a research participant. And the INN had a booth there. So if you're interested in these types of opportunities, I really encourage you to go to the website, go under contact, and click sign up here for the newsletter. A question is, would the job postings be considered co-ops too? Quite often they do count towards the co-op program, but it would be your co-op program officer or whoever in your department is managing the co-op placements, that they would be able to answer that question specifically. But my understanding is that co-op positions are quite flexible in what counts. So if you were to find a job through a research lab or through a posting on the SFU INN website, that would probably count towards your co-op credits. Like I said, the USRAs, the Undergraduate Research Awards, they count towards co-op. So they're pretty flexible. Any other questions? This has been great. We've covered a lot today.
Yes.
Just a quick question regarding the honors programs. So in terms of the honors programs, how much of it would you say is self-directed versus directed by the partnering professor?
So were you able to hear that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want? I can answer that. So to be honest, with the honors program, it really depends on your supervisor. Some supervisors let the undergraduate student pick the project, design the project, lead the project completely. And other supervisors say, sure, you want to do an honors in my lab? Here's a project that you can do as an honors, and are much more, give much more guidance and are a lot more hands-on. You'll know by talking to a professor. And I find that quite often it depends on how technical the projects are. And the more technical they are, the less freedom you have as an undergraduate. So the more technical or the more expensive they are to run the projects, the less freedom you will have to just do whatever you want. But if it's not going to cost the lab anything and you don't really need the technical expertise or very specified specific equipment, then you probably have more freedom. But it really depends on the supervisor.
Yeah, I'll just expand on that a little bit. Great answer. And I mean, Brianne said exactly what I was thinking. It depends on the supervisor. It kind of depends on the techniques. Quite often, if you come into a lab, the person who runs the lab may not be your direct supervisor. Quite often, undergraduate students are supervised by graduate students, or even other undergraduate students who have spent some time in the lab and know what's going on. Sometimes postdocs will supervise undergraduate students or even graduate students in terms of training, and that varies depending on how busy the what we call the principal investigator, the lab leader, whatever you want to call it, how busy they are with teaching and with other commitments that they might have at the same time. So it varies a lot, and it varies a lot from lab to lab too.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, even project to project, I had an honor student last year who worked very closely with a master student, and it was wonderful. And I have an honor student this year who hasn't matched up to a graduate student or a postdoc, and still has support from the lab, but not quite as clear as the honor student from last year. So it can really vary. Any other questions?
Okay, well, I'll hang out for a little while in the room in case anybody is trying to ask questions up for everybody to hear and wants to chat.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I encourage you also, if you're interested, to talk to your peers, talk to other students, undergraduate students who are gaining research experience, find out how they were able to find their positions, find out if they know of any positions that are open. I know that students in my lab have ended up applying to my lab because they know someone who's already working in my lab and they heard about it and learned about the opportunities. So I encourage you to talk to your peers. I encourage you to talk to your TAs. A lot of them are graduate students in labs. And of course, talk to your professors. Talk to them when you're before or after class, in their office hours. You know, we're here to help you make the most for your undergraduate experience. So please reach out if you have questions. And thank you everyone for attending. This has been really wonderful. And thank you, Dr. Ruben and the INN staff as well.
Thank you, Dr. Kemp. Thanks to everybody who's online, and thank you to the folks who came in person.